This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Thank you, and may God bless you. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Candace, Israel, Apartheid, and Genocide. With us this evening, Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, look, we always have to discuss the Israel-Palestinian conflict because the attempt of genocide against the Israeli people is always with us and against the Jewish people, and the Islamic war against the West and against all non-Muslims, as we know. But now we've got this genocidal, barbaric, monstrous attack of October 7th that has occurred. And as always happens, you know, and I've written about this in my book, Jihad is Psychopath. You know, these psychopaths are expert at doing this, and these are psychopathic entities. And you've written about this and talked about it, the cry bully. So when the psychopath punches you in the face, then he begins to cry and becomes the victim. And we're watching this right now. These Hamas terrorists enter Israeli territory, engage in rape and chopping off babies' heads and all these monstrosities. And then within the blink of an eye, hundreds of thousands of people are in the streets throughout the world cheering this on. And somehow it all becomes about Israeli quote-unquote sins. So this is the psychopathic game, also the totalitarian game. Look, it's difficult sometimes to unpack all this and to make my introduction short. So I think I'll end with the introduction that right after the Israelis again are the victims of these monstrous attacks, the Muslim Brotherhood Nazi playbook comes into effect, the accusatory finger against Israel right away. And two of the main accusations in this totalitarian Jew-hating playbook, there's many, but two key ones, is that Israel is an apartheid state and that Israel is also involved in genocide. And in comes somebody from our side, quote unquote, Candace Owens. So look, at the Freedom Center, we all kind of disagree to one extent or another about Candace to some degree. I think I'm one of her greatest fans. I have always liked Candace very much. I so much respect the stance she has taken on so many things. I think she's very talented, has done an effective, very effective job, courageous, very intelligent, and I could go on about that. And she's due a lot of credit and respect. And then all of a sudden, my jaw dropped when she begins to engage in certain themes and to argue certain themes. And some of it seemed implied, but on one show, and this is what ignited a lot of the things, she had a comedian, Ami, on the show that was arguing, you know, making the statements for Israel. But she was saying or implying that there's a Muslim quarter in Jerusalem where Muslims are confined to live. You know, so my jaw drops open at that one. And again, this is completely false. It falls into the Muslim Brotherhood Hamas Nazi playbook. And this is just a terrible thing. And she doesn't apologize for it. She doesn't retract it. And that stays there. There's other tweets that she's made and other things she's engaged in, which appears to suggest that she's pointing the finger at Israel for killing innocent civilians and she made a statement on Twitter about how genocide of all forms in one way or another, something like that in general, that genocide is wrong and it appears to be targeting the Israelis. And these are really, really false things, terrible things to say at this moment, plays into the enemy's hands. And it began a controversy. And we can get into this. Ben Shapiro was saying something that was on video, saying that some of her statements on this are, among other things, disgraceful. Then our Freedom Center issued an article. If people are interested, go take a look and Google it. It's called Goodbye Candace. And so I think I'll end it at that for now. I want to get into a lot of the issues that this has raised. Daniel, that is my attempt at a brief intro. Would you like to say something before we dive into the issues?
Well, to bring the two themes of your introduction together, well, what are we really talking about when we talk about an Islamic terrorist attack, whether it's what Hamas did in Israel or September 11th or Beslan in former Russian republics or so many of these other ones, what have been happening in Kashmir and places around the world? Now, there are two narratives here. One narrative is that we're talking about Islam. When we talk about Islamic terrorism, we're talking about Islam. It's not about the specific political events in a particular country. It's not, whatever Israel is doing in Gaza, whatever India is doing in Kashmir. It's not about whatever the United States was doing in the Middle East. It's about Islam. It's about a situation that has been going on for over 1,000 years that predates all these modern countries and all these modern issues. Or the other one is you accept whatever the narrative you're being hand-fed by the Muslim Brotherhood, by the media is, and then you go, well, it's because Israel is not treating the Palestinians nicely. But if so, then what was going on in Beslan? What was going on in New York City on September 11th? What is going on in India and Kashmir? Is it possible that just everybody is mistreating, just happens to be mistreating Muslims, or is there a larger global conflict? And Candace Owens, like a lot of people, people on the left, but also some people on the right, refuse to see this big picture. After September 11th, George W. Bush insisted that Islam is a religion of peace. So many of these other politicians, Republicans as well as Democrats, have kept on denying the reality that this is a problem of Islamic terrorism. And when Candace Owens goes out, she meets with Andrew Tate, who's a Muslim convert, who defends the Taliban. And when she goes out and repeats all these claims that Israel is committing genocide, all the stuff that you could just as easily get from BLM, all the stuff that the Islamists and their political allies are putting out there, it's clear she does not actually get the conflict. She is just as clueless about it as George W. Bush or so much of the left is. She believes that the conflict is about what Israel is doing rather than about what the Quran says. And when you don't understand that, then you're very, very liable to fall into the same error. You're liable to become a useful idiot for terrorists. That's the bottom line.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. This is a great disappointment. So let's get into some of these issues. But first, I would say, is I was just thinking, even when Candace was approaching some of these issues, like maybe get a little bit prepared at first. Off the top of my head, I would say Alan Dershowitz is the case for Israel. At the David Horowitz Freedom Center, we have a very good booklet by David, Why Israel is the Victim. It's packed with facts and the true history of what happened. We have another booklet at the center, Stolen History by David Mayer Levy. And, it's important to, maybe educate oneself a little bit as to these issues. And so this is where I want to begin, Daniel. It's not just the issues, it's also the disposition to the conflict. And so what I mean by that is the issue of moral equivalency and how our enemy has that tactic and how it tries to get our side to engage in it. So this is where I'm heading and where I'd like to begin. So I think a really good place to start would be on this issue. Tucker recently had Candace on to discuss this issue. And the same way that I've respected and been a big fan of Candace for so long, I watch her show. I think she, again, does an incredible job. The same thing that I would say about Tucker. Very brave, very stellar, courageous stances on so many issues. And now the disappointment on this issue. So Tucker begins speaking with Candace. It's also very weird. It's such a serious issue. And he's like, oh, I haven't really been following it. And it's very strange. What do you mean you haven't been following? What, you're not prepared for the interview? And because there's two key issues to bring up there, the ones that I've mentioned. But it's interesting that when he begins this discussion, he goes, oh, you haven't come out for Hamas, have you? And then he laughs. And then Candace, of course, says, oh, well, I'm not for Hamas. And my jaw drops at that. Because as we know, the way that evil often wins, it's not the devil in horns. It's the truth, but then just slightly blurred. When you read KGB documents, when you read about the KGB's tactics of destroying the left, how they nurtured and very much, they didn't want necessarily their people to argue the Soviet side. They wanted there to be a certain moral equivalency. So when the people who worked for the Soviets and the people who acted in the Soviets' interests, it wasn't that we like Joseph Stalin. It was that, yeah, Stalin is bad. Oh, but wait a minute, but the Americans did this. When we look at the Muslim Brotherhood playbook, when you look at the explanatory memorandum, that document that was discovered, and what they're planning to do on destroying our house from within, when we look at what these Muslim Brotherhood front groups are doing, it's always a sophisticated game. And it's not necessarily convert to Islam, Muhammad is great. It's okay, well, this may have happened over here, but look what's in the Old Testament and look at what the Americans have done. There's a moral equivalency that is much more powerfully destructive on certain levels than even if we were pro the enemy, okay? So this is a little bit difficult for me to unpack it in a brief amount of time, but I really wanted to say this because my jaw dropped open when Tucker was joking like that, and in the way that Candace has been defending herself, sort of like, well, we're just hearing both sides of this. Yes, you can hear both sides, but there's a way to do it. And when you apply moral equivalency, you don't have to come out for Hamas to actually enable and empower Hamas and its playbook and its strength. All you have to do is say, well, okay, Hamas is bad, but Israel does this. And the moment you imply that moral equivalency and set in that moral equivalency, you are actually empowering the enemy. And you are actually putting gas tank in the you are putting gas in the gas tank of Hamas, of the Soviet regime when you engage in that kind of thing. I just wanted to make that point. Daniel, what do you think about what I'm saying?
The bottom line is there's a right and a wrong. And Tucker Carlson, like any conservative pundit, has been strongest when he actually recognizes that there is a right and a wrong and asks clarifying questions about what that right or wrong is. When you don't actually see that there is a right or wrong, well, frankly, there isn't a whole lot more to say. And that's the bottom line for conservative activism for so many issues. A lot of people we call rhinos, a lot of the liberal Republicans don't really recognize that there is a right or a wrong, which is why they're unable to resist the left. If you don't recognize there's a right or wrong, you can't resist the left, you can't resist Islam, you can't resist the enemies of civilization.
Absolutely. But I wanted to say that because the way he began it and saying, you haven't come out for Hamas. Well, yeah, you can joke about it, but the tactics that are being engaged in, the things that Candace was saying, that could be empowering Hamas and the enemy far more than if you were for Hamas. It's just what I wanted to say there. So the destructiveness of moral equivalency and how that comes directly from the enemy's playbook and how they get the useful idiots to engage in that. So let's just begin with just some moral clarity here on this issue. One side sacrifices its own people in order to kill Jews. They sacrifice their own children. The mothers and the fathers celebrate when their children die in war. Israel, as we know, loves life and cherishes its people's lives. This is why one Israeli soldier is exchanged for about 1,000 Islamic terrorists. when they did that prison swap with Gilad Shalit, if I'm pronouncing his name right. But that alone right there shows something about these two sides. One side wants one person, the other side gets 1,000. What does it say about the civilization that just wants one life back? Then when you look at the fact that these terrorists just beheaded all of these babies and killed women, raped women, children, just all these barbaric attacks and cruelties and crimes against humanity. When Israel tries to fight back, this terrorist entity is hiding underneath hospitals and using human shields, which is very difficult, which makes it very difficult for Israel to act because it wants to save sides. Dennis Prager has many good videos on all of this. And one of his videos on this conflict, he makes just a very simple point. If the Israelis put down their weapons and they had no more weapons, what would happen? There would be a genocide of the Israeli people. If the Palestinian side and all the Arab nations put all their weapons down, there would be peace. I could go on, but there's a moral clarity that people see here right away. It's not that complicated, but it has become complicated because the enemy's lies are so powerful and how clever they are at their propaganda. So they love this argument about Israel being an apartheid state. So in her show with the comedian Ami, great guy, he made some good points. This was Candace's show. She starts comparing Muslim quarters in Jerusalem with something to do with the segregated South in America. Just mind-boggling analogy. And then she makes the implication or the statement that there's a confined Muslim quarters. This implies our overall argument that Israel is an apartheid state. There is no apartheid in Israel. And the Jewish comedian Ami Kozak that was on her show made a couple good arguments showing where she was incorrect. But look, here are the facts. Let's get into this here, Daniel. Muslim Arabs, number one, are not confined anywhere in Israel. They actually have more rights in Israel. Muslim Arabs have more rights in Israel than they do in any other country in the Middle East, in the Islamic Middle East. And what does that say? We also have to point out that if Muslim Arabs come to Israel, they will be fine. Let us remember the expulsion of the Jews from the Muslim Arab world after the Second World War. Up to 1 million Jews were expelled from those countries. If a Jewish person went to Gaza, a Jewish person went to the West Bank and started walking around, they would be killed immediately. Jews are not allowed to pray at the Temple Mount. Where is there really an apartheid happening? So with this development with Candace and what she was saying and this program that she had with Ami Kozak brings up a very important issue. And have I spoken some truths? And please expand on it.
Candace's comment was obviously dumb. It's like saying that because there's a Chinatown in New York City and San Francisco, we're confining the Chinese people to Chinatown. The quarters reflect where people live. They don't reflect some sort of arbitrary. And, she visited Israel around the time that the embassy was moved there. She clearly did not get anything. She didn't pick up anything. And she repeated a ridiculously ignorant comment because it's the sort of thing you do when you try to libel and smear people you don't like. Israel has Arab Muslims serving in the government, serving in the military, serving in various positions. There's no restriction on Arab Muslims who accept Israeli citizenship. All these claims of apartheid really come down to the people who do not want Israeli citizenship, and those are people who reject the idea that Israel should exist and that they should be a part of it. It's like the equivalent of people in the United States who decide that they do not want to be Americans, but they want to live here anyway. Obviously, and they want to wage war against it. It obviously does not work. The bottom line very simply is that there's no system of discrimination there, but there is very much a system of discrimination in the Arab Muslim world. It's as simple as, for example, that sign on the way to Mecca, which says Muslims can go here, non-Muslims cannot go here. Non-Muslims are not allowed there. As you mentioned, yes, non-Muslims are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, even though it's the holiest spot in Judaism. And when you look at, it's not just beyond the Muslims and Jews. Look at the situation for Christians. Bethlehem used to be a Christian town. It's no longer. The Christian population continues to dwindle year after year.
Sorry, just to interrupt for 1 second, Daniel. You said that Jews are not allowed to pray at the Temple Mount, correct?
Jews are not allowed to pray at the Temple Mount, at the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which is the place where the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, others are buried. Jews were not even allowed to go past the second step under Muslim rule. When Israel actually liberated and took back Hebron, became possible for Jews to come in and pray there. And there are invariably condemnations that the Jews are praying there. But as I mentioned, non-Muslims are not allowed into Mecca. They're not allowed into various sites that Muslims have decided to seize. You go to Istanbul at this point, and the Erdogan Islamic dictatorship has made certain sites for prayers off limits to Christians. So this is, the general Islamic position on non-Muslims, which is rather intolerant and is rather discriminatory. And Christians have been ethnically cleansed to a large degree from the Muslim world, as have other minorities. Israel has an incredible, they talk about diversity on the left. Israel has an incredible amount of diversity. Yes, there are Jews and Muslims there. There are Christians there. There are groups that we generally don't even pay that much attention to that would not actually be able to have a place in the Muslim world, like the Baha'i movement, which is a kind of post-Islamic, non-violent religious denomination that is persecuted in the Muslim world, that is able to build its headquarters in Israel. Israel does actually extend rights to everybody. This is not the case in the Muslim world, which practices actual real-world apartheid, which you can see as simply as that sign on the way to Mecca saying Muslims this way, non-Muslims that way.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. And so I want to get to now this issue of genocide and Candace's tweet on it. But I just want to say that even her tweets are a little bit problematic. She appears to be engaging in riddles. And then if somebody tries to call her out on something, she says, oh, no, but that's not what I was talking about. So this is very strange behavior also, instead of just coming out and maybe saying, my bad, I wasn't right on this, or etc. So because after Ben Shapiro on video, it was videotaped that he was saying her comments on these things have been disgraceful. He's correct in that. Many of these comments are. All of a sudden on her Twitter, there's all these Bible verses, and they appear to be targeting Ben. And they're New Testament verses, and I'm a Christian, and I want to be very careful with this. These are Christian verses, and they're wonderful, but I would say that one has to also be careful in using the Lord's name in vain, and when we're doing it and how. So I don't know what's in a person's heart, so I want to be careful here, but at the same time, it appeared that she was targeting Ben on all this. So then she was quoting something or saying something or quoting a verse about the choice between money and God and how you have to choose God, something like that. And then Ben tweets in answer to her, if it's such a big deal for you to choose between money and God, then just quit. And it appeared to be logical that he was doing that because those tweets appeared to be targeting him. But then she writes back something along the lines of, you're paranoid, what are you getting? This isn't even about you. You're out of control. Don't insert yourself into the scriptures. To me, it seems kind of, one word we could use is unfair, because he was responding clearly to something that she was targeting him with. I'm using that as an example here of now this tweet on genocide. So she tweets, no government anywhere has a right to commit a genocide ever. There's no justification for a genocide. I can't believe this even needs to be said or is even considered the least bit controversial to state. But she leaves it at that, doesn't mention Israel. Then later to the best of my knowledge, she tried to say that this wasn't about the conflict, but it very clearly is, in connection to some other things that she has said. Her invitation of Norm Finkelstein, another shocking thing in terms of who this person is. Look, I have this show. We invite people of different viewpoints, absolutely. But when you invite somebody like Norm Finkelstein and allow him to engage for an hour and 15 minutes in terms of what he engaged in without correctly catching the lies and the distortions and fallacies all out of context, then we've got a problem. So let us begin with this issue of genocide or killing innocent civilians that's thrown against Israel, and that now this issue that Candace has brought to the forefront that we need to discuss. I would begin with this, Daniel. If we had this kind of thinking during the Second World War about, let's say, the British carpet bombing of Dresden, in terms of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, innocent civilians tragically died. Our side did not do that because it wanted to kill innocent civilians. But if we had this kind of thinking that this should not be done, innocent people are dying, we wouldn't have defeated Hitler. It's very, very crucial to say that Israel is not even engaged in that kind of war. Israel is not even doing that to begin with. But we have to bring this up, that in terms of what Israel may be doing is fighting a terrorist entity that's trying to destroy Israel and inadvertently killing innocent civilians, whereas the enemy is intentionally killing innocent civilians. So what Israel is doing, far from anything connected to genocide, and regrettably, it regrets when innocent civilians die. Let me hand it over to you.
There's a fundamental difference between war and genocide. Genocide is the planned mass murder and repression of a population. War is an attempt to destroy the enemy's military capabilities. It's an attempt to win the war. Now, when the enemy operates within civilian areas, then those areas are valid targets. And when you're fighting Islamic terrorists, there is simply no way to fight Islamic terrorists without killing civilians, because the only defensive strategy of Islamic terrorists is to go and hide behind civilians, to operate within civilian areas. This goes back to the various Marxist guerrilla movements. Mao, I believe, said that, and the revolutionary has to be like a fish in the water among the people. And this was the policy. You want to be entirely among civilians, surrounded by civilians. We saw this in the Viet Cong and Vietnam. They try to blend in the civilian population. So trying to fight enemies, leftists, Islamic terrorists who operate this way without killing civilians is like trying to invade Russia without experiencing cold weather. It's not physically possible. Now, the people who falsely equate that to genocide are being just fundamentally dishonest. And one of the more blatant examples of this is when Hamas actually invaded Israel, killed over 1,000 people. Nobody on the pro-Hamas side, on the leftist side, and people on the alt-right call this genocide. It's only genocide somehow when Israel fights back. When over 1,000 Israelis are murdered, that's not genocide. But if 1,000 from the enemy side are killed, then that's immediately genocide. So these people don't actually believe this is genocide. They're simply throwing out smears to attack Israel, and they're behaving like trolls. And a basic difference between trolls and normal people is that normal people say what they mean. They may be on the right, may be on the left, but they express an opinion. Trolls will make vague, ambiguous statements meant to entrap people, as they call it, wrong foot people, into taking a position, into responding to them. At that point, we'll say, oh, you think this is what I meant. They're stirring up drama. This is what trolls basically do. They're not honest about what they believe. They're not honest about their intentions. Their goal is to create drama. It's mean girls behavior. And unfortunately, people do fall for it, which is why trolls exist on the internet. And some of them become very famous and very popular.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. We're going to take a quick break with our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell. Years ago, when I invented My Pillow, I was faced with every adversity you could think of. No retailers wanted to sell My Pillow. That's come full circle. Vendors took advantage of me, and I was copied by China. Well, by the grace of God, I was able to get through all that and learn from it. I have a passion to help other U.S. entrepreneurs, and that's why I created my new platform, mystore.com. We have hundreds of products from amazing entrepreneurs. And to celebrate, I'm going to put my pillows on mystore.com right now. You can get my standard My Pillows regularly $69.98, now only $19.98 with your promo code. Or you can get my standard queen size regular $79.98, now only $29.98. Or you can get my premium king size regularly $89.98, now only $34.98. So go to mystore.com and use that promo code on your screen to get huge discounts on all My Store products. Thank you and God bless.
And welcome back. We are here with Shillman Fellow from the David Horowitz Freedom Center, Daniel Greenfield. And he is informing us and revealing many of the facts and the myths about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Daniel, let's go back a little bit to some other lies and myths. It's just even difficult to know where to start. So we've got this whole thing about how, okay, so we've discussed there's this falsehood about Israeli genocide. There's this falsehood about Israeli apartheid. But now even the foundations, that these Palestinian people have always been there, and that there was some kind of Palestinian state, that somehow land was stolen from the Palestinians. It's hard to know where to start because the Palestinians, just even the term, this is a KGB creation that came around in the mid-1960s. These are Arabs. And just like Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, Israel was created on land that originally belonged to the Turks. They're carving out the Ottoman Empire. So let's just begin with that. There's never any land taken from anybody. This is land left over, just like I said, those other countries were created. And the UN partition plan of 1947, the Arabs are offered a state, the Jews are offered a state. Take it from there.
Oh, we get one state. They talk about the two-state solution. The second state already exists. It's called the Kingdom of Jordan. But we can go back before that, for that matter. You have a gentleman on Twitter who told me today, a Muslim gentleman, that the Palestinians are absolutely legitimate because they have a Canaanite Philistine DNA, and the Philistines were actually from the Aegean region in Europe, so they're European. The Canaanites are an Iron Age people. This kind of thing is nonsense. It's like claiming that the Arab Muslims who invaded Egypt are the original ancient Egyptians. They're not. The Arab Muslims who invaded Israel and moved in there are not some sort of ancient indigenous people. They're colonists and invaders. Some of this happened a while back. Some of this actually happened in the 18th and 19th centuries. Particularly once the British came in, there were economic opportunities that opened up, and a whole bunch of people from around the area from Egypt showed up, and you can tell that they're from Egypt because they have names like Masri, and Masri means Egyptian in Arabic. So on and so forth, Suri, which means Syrian. So these are people from the surrounding Arab countries, but they weren't actually countries back then. We hear names like Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and we think these are the actual countries you hear about in the Bible. They're not. They're countries that were carved out on maps by the British and the French back after World War I. They drew lines on the map. They try to create particular countries that would be dominated by some of their political allies, Arab tribes, who had fought with them against the Ottoman Empire. And the Jews had also fought against the Ottoman Empire. And as a result, they had lines on the map for a Jewish state, various Arab states that would be dominated by friendly Arab tribes. This is where the origin of the current map really comes from. The Arab Muslims themselves had obviously invaded the area back in the day, but various tribes moved in and out, and there was really not a large Arab Muslim presence until very recently. There was more of a Christian presence, actually, which makes perfect sense because it was a holy land for Jews and Christians. It was not really much of a holy land for Muslims. Ramallah, which is the biggest city in the so-called Palestinian Authority, the so-called their capital, was originally founded by Christians who were fleeing persecution, I believe, in the 17th or 18th centuries. So there really isn't that much of an Arab Muslim history there. The Arab Muslim presence there is really escalated under British rule, at which point those Arab Muslims began engaging in violence against Jews, persecution against Jews, leading into what we have today. This is not a question of Jews coming in and taking somebody else's land. First of all, Jews were the indigenous population there, as much as any people there can claim to be an indigenous population. By the way, you have Jews there, you have Samaritans, you do have some ancient peoples there. The Arab Muslims are not among those ancient peoples. The Bedouins are the closest to come to it. And a whole lot of them are actually on Israel's side. Some of them were actually massacred on October 7th. One of the stories we're not really hearing is that Bedouins were being massacred by the Hamas attackers. The bottom line, though, again, is that when the Jews came in, when the Jews actually moved to Israel, they bought land. They took land that nobody else wanted, because much of what the Arab Muslim population was doing is they were cultivating olive trees, and they had their herds of goats and sheep who were nibbling out and eliminating much of the grassland. They weren't doing any kind of more sustained agriculture for the most part. It was the Jews who came in, drained swamps, made the desert boom. It's cliches, but this actually happened. You look at accounts from 19th century travelers, like, say, Mark Twain, who came there and said there was pretty much nothing there. It's all abandoned. It's a barren wasteland. So they put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears making that happen. They created sustained agriculture. They built up cities, and they made the land actually livable, at which point, of course, it attracted more Arab Muslims who were very interested in being part of it and in taking over the land. So to whatever extent somebody took somebody else's land, it was the Arab Muslim invaders who did that. They did that in the original War of Independence in 1948, when Jews were ethnically cleansed from half of Jerusalem. And now when the Jews actually try to move back into that part of Jerusalem, the international community, including the Biden administration, starts complaining that the Jews are displacing the Arab Muslims who were only living there because they took the actual houses of the Jews who were living there. So we have this absurd situation where any place that Arab Muslims ever take over is theirs eternally. This is obviously the Islamic position. It's why you have this claim that Spain really belongs to Islam and will be reclaimed by Islam eventually once again, and then parts of maybe France and Italy as well that were at one point claimed by Muslims. But Jews, no matter what kind of how deep, how ancient their history in this land, no matter what their rights to this land are never actually have any rights there. So the Jews are always illegitimate. People who are not Muslims are always illegitimate in the land, but the Arab Muslims are automatically always legitimate. And this is an Islamic double standard that a lot of leftists have accepted as gospel truth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. So let us keep also in mind the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, during the Second World War, was meeting with Hitler, begging Hitler to bring the Holocaust and the final solution to the Middle East and hopefully in the Grand Mufti's vision that Hitler would be successful with doing that, accomplishing that genocide of the Jewish people in Europe. And the Grand Mufti was begging Hitler to come down and do the same thing in the Middle East. That has to be remembered, that this Grand Mufti, he supported Nazi Germany. He recruited Muslims for the Nazi military and for the SS units, etc., etc. And that has a lot of significance and has to be kept in mind. So the 1947 UN partition plan. So the Arabs in that region area wanted to destroy Jews rather than have their own state. They rejected having their own state because their priority is for there not to be an Israeli state. 1948, Israel is created anyway. And once Israel is created, the Arab countries surrounding Israel immediately wage war on Israel. The Arabs that were within Israel, the Israelis said, "You are welcome to stay here." It was the Arab countries that waged war on Israel that told the Arab population to get out, and then they began waging war. So Israel never expelled the Arab people from that region, correct?
That's correct. And there was never a claim of an independent Palestinian state or identity. We're talking about the West Bank and Gaza. So after 1948, the West Bank and Gaza were held by Jordan and Egypt. Gaza was held by Egypt. There were still terrorist attacks from there, but Egypt and Jordan were not creating a Palestinian state. Nobody was saying, Egypt and Jordan, you have to create a Palestinian state. This was a phenomenon that came into being only after Israel liberated the West Bank and Gaza. So again, this is entirely cynical exercise.
Mm-hmm. This is all interwoven and interconnected with Sahih Muslim 6985, the genocidal hadith. It's all interwoven with the anti-Semitism in the Quran. It's all interwoven with what Muhammad was engaged in terms of the Banu Qurayza tribe, in terms of his war on Jews, in terms of his commandments to kill Jews. There is a reason why Hamas terrorists scream Allahu Akbar, why Islamic jihadists scream it. It doesn't mean God is great, as we have discussed on this show, Daniel. It means Allah is greater than your God and you, and that's why it's justified to kill you. There's an Islamic element here. This is a religious war. And it's very unfortunate, for instance, that somebody like Candace, who has done so well on so many issues, does not recognize this, does not discuss it, does not push back Norm Finkelstein on the show with some of these facts when he engages in his fallacies. So let's just discuss some of this here. So let's just go further into time here. Why is there Hamas in Gaza to begin with? Well, that's because the Oslo Syndrome Jewish population in Israel gave away Gaza for peace, thinking and hoping there would be peace. So the Palestinians grab Gaza after that because Israelis give it to them in 2005. Within the blink of an eye, Hamas is ruling. Rockets are being launched into Israel. That's their sign of gratitude. But I want to bring up one thing here. When Israelis left Gaza and gave it to the Palestinians, they left an infrastructure. They left greenhouses for the Palestinians. And the Palestinians destroyed the greenhouses. I wish that Candace had asked Norm Finkelstein why they had done that, because I think that that alone crystallizes what this conflict is about. Why would you destroy greenhouses that are left for you to build a society and an economy on? Why don't you tell us why they destroyed those greenhouses, Daniel?
Well, those greenhouses actually made, among other things, a special brand of organic lettuce that was actually I used to enjoy back in the day. But there were arrangements made for Israel to turn over all this infrastructure to create a thriving economy in Gaza. With those, the World Bank was involved. They came in and said, we have this great plan. There's going to be a good economy. That it's going to end terrorism. It's going to be fine. Israel forcibly evicted its Jewish population, and now the Arab Muslims will have their chance to build their utopia. And of course, the greenhouses, everything else left behind was destroyed because Hamas is not interested in having a functional economy there. Their economy is making money from terror sponsors. It's making money from Qatar, from Iran. And the more miserable things are, much like in the Soviet Union, the more likely it is that they'll have more recruits for their terrorism, for their terrorist movement. So their goal is there are a whole bunch of millionaires and billionaires at the top ranks of Hamas, but they do it by controlling whatever's left of the economy and getting money from Iran, Qatar, other Islamic terrorist groups. Other Islamic State sponsors of terrorism. They don't want there to be an actual functional economy in which people can make money. This was a major mistake that Israel also made again when they allowed a whole bunch of Gazans to come to work in Israel. And the smart people thought $2 million a day is coming in through these workers into Gaza. They're going to have hope. They're going to have opportunity. Things are going to be good. What we actually found out was that some of these Gazan day laborers were at the same communities that were attacked. They drew maps, they sketched out everything. Some of them actually carried out the attacks. Israeli authorities were going through some of these bodies of these Hamas terrorists. They found actually work permit cards on them. So the idea that you can just meet these people on our terms, that they want the same things that we do, they want to just be middle class. They want to have a car, 2 cars in every garage. They want to have the chickens in every pot. No, they want something else. And that is really at the heart of the question of what Islamic terrorism is. What is it that they want? And it's not what we want.
They didn't even want something touched by Jewish hands when they destroyed those greenhouses. So this conflict is about something else than what the Israel haters try to argue. So we've got also the Palestinian Authority, we've got Hamas, all in different ways funding the killing of Jews. We know that Abbas has the pay for slay program. They pay families of terrorists, of suicide bombers. They actually pay their people to kill Jews. I don't know. I've never read anything or know anything about the Israeli government paying the families of Israelis if any of their relatives kill an Arab person. I think there's moral clarity right there. Our time is ending. We need to do another, obviously, segment on this. I would recommend to people that think that there's a moral equivalency to read actually what the Hamas charter says. I think it's important for people to know that Mein Kampf is a bestseller in the Muslim world. And so we've got this conflict staring us straight in the face right now, Daniel. What are some of the most important things for us to keep in mind right now?
Not to be divided, because when you're divided, you're conquered. Islamic terrorism is coming for all of us. It's coming for Jews. It's coming for Christians. It's coming for atheists. It's coming for whoever you are if you're not a Muslim. This is something we can see around the world. There's Islamic terrorism in America, in China, in Russia, in India. You can see it in Asia and Latin America. And yes, you see it in Israel. The idea that all these countries are experiencing disparate phenomena is exactly what the terrorists and their accomplices, their useful idiots, want you to believe. What we're experiencing is a global phenomenon, one that goes back over 1,000 years. This is what Islamic terrorism is. People who don't get that, who refuse to educate themselves, like Candace Owens, will eventually become accomplices with evil. We have a very clear choice. We've had that same choice on September 11th and before it. You're either against Islamic terrorism, you're either against the jihad, or you're an accomplice to it. And we all have that choice to make. And some people make the right one, some people make the wrong one.
I think it would be also not right to leave yet from the program without mentioning 1993 Oslo Accord. So all of the negotiations, everything that was going on. And then near the end, Ehud Barak offered Arafat almost everything for a peace plan. And Arafat's gratitude for that was launching the second intifada. I mean, I think there's some moral clarity right there as well, right?
Well, the terrorists at no point in time do they want to make a deal. The perverse thing that has baffled so many people is that the closer you come to a deal, the more they escalate the violence, because their goal is terrorism. Their goal is not to sign an agreement, call it off, and actually have to govern their own state, because after they have to govern their own state, they have no ability to do that. And it's not what their religion, it's not what their entire ideology and worldview tells them to do. So you offer them exactly what they want. We just actually saw the Hamas ceasefire deal now, and immediately Hamas introduced problems once everybody was saying the agreement was reached. This is what terrorists do every time. The closer you get to a deal with them, the more they start sabotaging it.
Well, let's end on that right there, Daniel. First of all, even the taking of these hostages, just real barbaric stuff, the kind of hostages that they're taking, old ladies, little children, babies. I mean, taking hostages, of course, wrong to begin with, barbaric to begin with, but even what kind of hostages they're taking. Then they're hiding them under a hospital and under hospitals, and they're hiding them where there's civilian populations. I mean, that says it all. But even I was reading the details of this potential swap that they're going to do. Once again, we have moral clarity. They're going to give back a little child. Israel has to give back a lot of terrorists sitting in jail. What does that tell us?
Their priority is terrorists. Their society is based around terrorism. The jihadi in its various forms is the fundamental expression of the Islamic religious imperative. So they take hostages, they take men, but they also take women and children, the elderly, because they view their entire society as combatants, and they view the societies they target as combatants. There have been fatwas that have said all Israeli civilians are fair game for terrorism. So they view their entire society as being militarized. They view all societies that they target as being militarized. They follow no laws of war that we consider decent or humane. They follow their laws of war, which is total war against the rest of the world.
Daniel, I think so. Our main message to those people watching that still think that this is somehow confusing or there's some kind of moral equivalency, choose the right side. And we have to be for Israel, just for the sake of Israel, for the sake of the Jewish people, for the sake of the Israeli cause, for the sake of Israel's right to exist, period. But we can also add on another dimension those America firsters, we got to be for America. What does that matter over there? No, 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 no. If you're America first, you should know that being for Israel is part of America first, because Israel's battle is our battle. The fight for civilization and to be on the side of good against evil is our battle as well. And we have to remember that there's a certain entities out there that believe that there's a great Satan and a little Satan. They hate Israel, they hate the United States. And if they want to kill all the Jewish people first, they're going to go after somebody else afterwards. So this is our battle on so many levels. Can we end with that?
I think it's a good message. I'm America first, but I don't want to be America last. The idea that the jihad can take the rest of the world and we're going to be fine is delusional. America first actually does not mean believing that America should be the last to fall. It means that we should actually be standing up to the enemy.
Very powerful point. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us for this conversation and trying to dismantle so many of these lies and myths and to tell the truth about Israel and its right to exist, its morality. I don't think there's ever any nation in the world that has been more humane and civilized in its effort to defend itself against terrorism than Israel has. Am I correct that you write the best blog on the internet? It's The Point at Front Page Magazine. Should people be visiting anything else, Daniel?
Well, Front Page Mag is a great site with a lot of talented writers and videos, including a guy named Jamie here who has a show there.
Thank you so much, Daniel. We hope to see you soon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening. Please subscribe to our Rumble channel and press instant notification, because it's a catastrophe over at Stalinist totalitarian YouTube. We'll see you soon. Good night.